Hi, welcome back to the channel and my review for Final Destination from 2000, directed by James Wong. So 14 years after the last sequel, we are getting another addition to the Final Destination franchise. A sixth movie is coming out next week. So this is a franchise that has spanned 25 years now, which is just crazy to think about. I grew up watching these movies as a teenager, especially this first film. I watched it a number of times, so I have a lot of nostalgia for it. Of course, it was a massive hit as well back when it came out, both within the culture and financially as well. It did extremely well, spawned a number of sequels and all sorts. But it really took a lot of influence from a lot of those late 90s horror films, particularly Scream. You know, there was a whole load of movies in the late 90s and the early 2000s where horror movies had that very distinct style and flavour, and I think it was one that you either love or you hate. Me personally, I love those kind of movies, and Final Destination was kind of the new addition to this. But rather than just being a regular slasher film, it brought in this very cool, creative, new concept, which found amazing new ways for our lead characters to die in, but also for all of them to kind of deal with new situations that we hadn't seen before in this type of horror film. But yeah, this movie's a lot of fun. I've always had a lot of enjoyment watching this, and I am going to be reviewing every single movie in the franchise leading up to the new film. So if you enjoy the Final Destination films, please come along and join me watching these films again, and let me know in the comments what your thoughts on these films are. So getting into the plot here, we're following this young guy, Alex, who is going on a school trip to France. And when he gets on the plane, he has a premonition that the plane he's on is going to explode, killing everybody on board. And it's such a vivid and such a real premonition that he decides to act straight away in this panic and manages to get a handful of people to come off this plane with him. Of course, you find out then the plane does in fact explode, killing everybody. And all of these characters that have effectively managed to cheat death, Death is not happy with this and is going to come back to kill each one of them off to make everything right again. So you're kind of following these characters, trying to find any way they can to cheat death once more. Of course, the opening sequence from this film, I guess, is the most iconic part, not just of this film, but of the whole franchise. It's definitely always been the most memorable scene for me, and watching it again, I was surprised by how well done it really is. Everything in that first 20-25 minutes leading up to the premonition of the plane crash and the explosion itself is just incredibly well done. And it definitely taps into that fear that some people have. You know, for me personally, I'm definitely one of those kind of people that when I'm getting on a plane, I'm looking out the window thinking, could you imagine what it'd be like to roll over into the ground with everyone on board right now? I'm the sort of person that has those thoughts pop into my head when I'm taking off on a flight. And I think this movie really captures that so well. And it's just such an intense sequence. When anything starts going wrong in that premonition, when you don't realise yet as the audience that it is a premonition, it's just, yeah, it's really dark, it's really intense. And you're just like, what the hell just happened? And then kind of going over that situation as he's trying to get everybody off and this panic and nobody believes him, just the chaos and everything going on. It's just really well executed. And something I like about this film is I think more, particularly in this first film, more attention was paid to the build-up leading up to the premonition. You know, you kind of get this sense of dread and this idea that in the air something is not right. Even from the perspective of the main character, Alex, he's noticed a few things that don't feel quite right. He's already feeling a little bit anxious, and then everything that happens. And I just think the whole build up to this scene is just done extremely well. I do also really like the main two characters we're following here. I've always thought the rest of the group is what lets the film down, I think. Whereas in a lot of these other movies of this style, the group often had a great dynamic and great dialogue and just a fun banter between them. I do think that is lacking somewhat in Final Destination, which brings it down a bit for me against something like Scream. But I do think the two leads, Devon Sawa and Ali Larter, playing Clear Rivers, very cool name from this movie. But yeah, I quite like those two. They're very likeable, from the kind of these Canadian actors, I guess, that were lower budget at the time. But they've definitely got likability about them. And, obviously we're not comparing the performances to Leonardo DiCaprio here, but I think for the kind of movie they're in, they fit in really nicely. Devon Sawa, he does show emotion in the right spots. He kind of captures the intensity well. You get the feeling that he's kind of really eager to work out why all of this has happened, that he's working so hard to try and help everybody that he can. And he just plays the character in a very convincing way, I think. I really like him. Ali Larter might be being blinded by the fact that she was just so attractive that I can't actually tell whether she's a good actress or not. But yeah, she's a really nice presence in this film, and I love that they managed to bring her back into the sequel as well. A lot of the fun from this movie does come from all of the creative ways in which there are to kill off these characters. Something that gets way more crazy and elaborate as the franchise goes on. It was still much tamer, I think, especially in regards to like the gore and just the extremity of the death sequences. But a few of them do still take you by surprise and are kind of funny in a weird way, like particularly the scene with the bus that hits the girl outside the cafe. I remember first seeing that and being like, what? So that was it's still a great scene to watch. So there's a lot of fun stuff like that, a lot of these lead ups to your kind of basically the film gets you to pay attention to little things that you think is going to be what kills off a particular character, and it ends up being something else. Watching the sequels, I think they kind of perfected that a little bit later on, where they got way more creative at kind of diverting your attention. But I really do like the way they do it here, and it makes for a lot of good entertainment. I do unfortunately think the movie loses a bit of steam after the whole plane crash sequence. Like after that first half an hour, it never quite reaches those heights again, I don't think, which is a bit of a shame. It's definitely still fun to go along with, like it kills the time really nicely. It's a really fun hour and a half, but I just felt like the first half an hour you're looking at a really great horror film, and just the rest of it never quite reaches that level again, unfortunately. There is still a lot of fun and entertainment to have in each of these various sequences as all of this group of people are being picked off one by one. There's a very fun sequence in which you get introduced to the coroner, which is a cameo, of course, Tony Todd, who played Candyman. They find a reason for him to turn up here, and he's this kind of reoccurring character that comes in throughout the franchise. He's like the guy who comes in to explain the rules of how death is working and why it's taking people out and clues as to how they can avoid it. Of course, with these kind of movies, you get very little explanation as to why any of this is happening. So you get this random character just come in to basically explain a number of things to the characters we're following. But it's really nice to see Tony Todd. He's got a great presence. He's got that wonderful deep voice. And even though his character is kind of a bit ridiculous, I always just have a lot of fun seeing him pop up in this film and all of the various sequels as well. Interestingly, this one is actually a lot darker and more somber than the sequels, I think. I kind of forgotten that about this. That it does take itself a little bit more seriously, especially when you get to the second film. There's a much lighter and more kind of self-aware, playful tone, I think, and they kind of ramped up the ridiculousness of it all, whereas here, it is all taking itself quite seriously, like especially after the plane crash. when you've got Alex kind of mourning the death of a lot of his classmates, and there's kind of the family dramas where his friend can't speak to him, and there's a few quite touching moments in a way, really. So they kind of do pay a lot of attention to the character arcs and more of the emotion and what people, young guys and girls would actually react to in a horrific situation like this. And I do kind of appreciate that more now about this first film, whereas when I was younger, I think I liked the kind of outrageousness of the sequels just getting bigger and nastier and faster pace and everything. But watching these again now, I do kind of appreciate the slower burn and the time taken to really properly develop these characters. Like I said, it's not a perfect film though. There are a number of issues with it. As I've talked about, the first half being much better than the second. But also there are just a number of contrived situations, so much so that it actually becomes a little bit distracting, I think. Like the way these characters all keep getting brought together just out of nowhere. Like Seann William Scott's character in particular, every time there's a murder or a lead up to something big happening, or the group end up bumping into each other, he's turning up on his bike out of nowhere. And it just becomes how silly, how coincidental all of these situations end up being. I do think also some of the sequences get a little bit over the top at times. I find the whole scene in the car where Carter, the kind of bully of the group, where he thinks he's going to be next, so he just suddenly just has like a crazy moment where he's got his foot down on the pedal and he's driving the car, the group around with no hands on the wheel. There's trucks flying out the way. They stop on the train line. Like that whole sequence in general, it just feels a bit cartoonish because of how silly and over the top it is. And again, it stopped me from really connecting with any of these other characters in the group just because they didn't really feel like real people to me. So those are my only real negatives for the film. Like, it's not a masterpiece by any means, but in terms of the these type of horror films that came out in the late 90s and early 2000s, this was definitely a standout, I think. I get why a lot of people go back and watch this movie. It's a lot of fun. I've seen it a number of times before, and I will go back again to see it a number of times, I'm sure, in the future. So I am just about going to give this movie a 3.5 out of 5. But guys, do let me know down in the comments what you think of the first Final Destination film. If you've seen it, let me know all your thoughts down below. As always, thanks so much for watching this review. Do take care, and I'll see you next time.